The senator from Texas.
Madam President, are we on a quorum call?
We are not.
Madam President, it's been 6 days since Senate Democrats have shut down the federal government. They did that by blocking a clean continuing resolution, as it's called around here, a stopgap spending bill that would take us to November the 21st to provide enough time to try to work out appropriations bills for full year funding, which are highly preferable to simply operating on autopilot as a continuing resolution would do. And this has already passed the House of Representatives. So all we need to do to reopen the government is for five Democrats to join 3 other Democrats and Republicans to vote to reopen the government, not forever, but for the next 9 weeks or so. Let's not forget that it was partisan antics on their part that have brought us where we are today. We've now voted not just once, but 4 times on the House-passed clean government funding bill. While 3 Democrats have seen the light, as I said earlier, and have joined Republicans in voting for a clean continuing resolution, they have routinely done this in the past. When President Biden was in office, when Chuck Schumer was the majority leader, we voted for, I think, 13 separate continuing resolutions. But so far, they've refused to do so out of pure spite and partisanship. Government shutdowns have unfortunately become far too common in Washington, but I think it's important to take a minute to consider the impacts, the real world impact on our constituents back home. Since Texas is obviously one of the largest states in the country, it will suffer an outsized impact. The Lone Star State is home to about 130,000 federal civilian employees. This number includes 33,000 who work with the Veterans Health Administration. These are the folks who serve our veterans, who we are duty-bound and obligated, morally obligated to support. But 33,000 of them will be negatively impacted by this shutdown, already have been. Almost 18,000 of these employees of these total number, work for U.S. Customs and Border Protection. These are the folks that stop illegal drugs from entering in the country and make sure that illegal aliens don't make their way into the country, as we've seen during the last 4 years. Close to 6,000 Texans work for the Transportation Security Administration, the folks that you encounter at airports and various different ports that help manage the flow of travelers going to and from security screenings before they board flights. Finally, the Lyndon B. Johnson Space Center in Texas has 3,000 employees, but is expected to furlough about 70% of them due to the lapse in federal funding. What happens to these federal employees during a government shutdown? Well, the most dramatic thing that happens to them is they don't get paid. Even those that are deemed essential and who have to work, they work without pay, just as those who are furloughed work without pay. Now, before I came to the floor, I looked up a statistic, and I think it sounds about right, but 6 out of 10 Americans live paycheck to paycheck. And while it may be okay for members of Congress, particularly wealthy members of Congress who don't have to worry about living paycheck to paycheck, to miss a paycheck, it's catastrophic to many, many Americans who live paycheck to paycheck, who don't have adequate savings to help them weather a government shutdown. And while each of these categories receive back pay once the government's reopened, they cannot receive a paycheck during the shutdown. This is extraordinarily unfair to these government employees who, through no fault of their own, are being denied the pay that they have earned. Now, this will have a particularly serious impact on our military and Department of Homeland Security personnel, many of whom have been designated as accepted, or we used to say some were essential employees, but they have to stay on the job, in other words. But they don't get paid either. Texas has 15 active duty military installations where personnel are required to continue reporting for duty throughout the shutdown. These active duty personnel will not be paid again until a final funding deal is reached. And right now, we don't know how long this is going to go on. I know most of us come to the floor and express our gratitude, our profound gratitude to our men and women in uniform and their families that serve our country and keep us safe. But this strikes me as a very bad way to say thank you to them by saying, yes, you have to continue to work, but no, you're not going to be paid. So Senate Democrats apparently have made that calculation. This is how they thank them: by cutting off their pay, denying them their livelihood, and holding them hostage over petty partisan demands. In addition to active duty military personnel, I mentioned Customs and Border Protection. All of them are expected to continue reporting for duty day in and day out during the government shutdown. Our Border Patrol agents, who bore the brunt of Biden's open border policies, working hundreds of hours in some of the harshest of conditions, and have processed millions of illegal aliens flooding into the United States courtesy of President Biden. Now we're telling them, or at least Senate Democrats are telling them, you're not going to get paid. This is how they have chosen to reward these patriotic men and women who keep our borders secure, by shutting down the government and denying them their paycheck. And why do Senate Democrats think this is so important? Well, they've told us what their demands are, what the ransom that they are demanding. They want us to wipe out a $50 billion rural hospital stabilization fund that was part of the One Big Beautiful Bill. Many of us represent rural states that have large rural areas, and access to health care is a big problem. And we had tried to address that problem by providing a significant fund, this Rural Hospital Stabilization Fund, to help address those concerns. But Democrats want to take that away. We also said in the One Big Beautiful Bill, no money can go to provide health care for illegal aliens. Access to free government services is one of the magnets that draw people to come to our country in the first place. This is one of the so-called pull factors that the Border Patrol talks about. And we said no more free health care for illegal aliens, which is a magnet for people to enter the country the wrong way, not the right way. And Democrats want to restore that free health care to illegal aliens as part of their demands for reopening the government. Madam President, this is simply unconscionable, but it is also profoundly dumb. Shut down the government solves nothing. We've seen this movie before, and what happens when you reopen the government, the same problem, the same issues that caused you to shut down the government are there staring you in the face. So these shutdowns solve nothing. I don't know how Senate Democrats can continue voting against a clean government funding bill like they themselves have previously supported on a routine basis, knowing that the men and women who keep them and us safe are working for free, without a paycheck, for no other reason than that Senate Democrats refuse to give up on their partisan pipe dreams. FEMA employees, Federal Emergency Management Agency, who are first responders in a case of natural disaster, are also expected to continue to be working without paid during hurricane season, no less. In addition to law enforcement and emergency personnel, a government shutdown affects all Americans one way or the other. It affects travel, it affects access to public lands. TSA workers and air traffic controllers have to keep working, and these are the people that make sure our airlines operate safely and on time. But they have to work without pay. The hiring and training of any new air traffic controllers, which we know is a real problem and an important issue, all that will stop during the time the federal government shut down. No new hiring of new personnel to help make our air traffic safe. All of this because Senate Democrats can't work in a bipartisan manner to keep government open even for a few weeks. The government shutdown also impacts our national parks and federal lands. Texas boasts 3.2 million acres of federally operated public lands, including Big Bend National Park, Guadalupe Mountains National Park, and Padre Island National Seashore. National parks face a partial shutdown, meaning that some areas, such as open-air sites, will remain open to the public, but buildings that require staffing, like museums, will have to close. Madam President, my constituents, roughly 32 million Americans, like all Americans, have to pay the price because of this completely unnecessary government shutdown and the outrageous demands Democrats are making to reopen. All of this lies squarely at their feet. You know, I was reflecting over the weekend, after the last time we voted to reopen the government and Democrats voted no, how this must reflect on the United States in the eyes of the world. You know, I think most countries, most people around the world look at the United States as sort of that city on the hill, the place where they would like to live or at least visit, because we have the largest, most successfully functioning democracy in the world, with high standards of living, the opportunity for people to work hard, provide for their family, start a business, achieve their dreams. It is profoundly embarrassing, I think it should be embarrassing, to all members of Congress that we simply cannot get our act together enough to fund the government for the next few weeks while these negotiations over long-term appropriations bills are occurring. This kind of dysfunction is completely unworthy of what has been known, what has used to be known as the world's greatest deliberative body. The unfortunate reality is it doesn't have to be this way. Many of our Democratic friends have from time to time talked about various things being a threat to democracy. Well, being unable to pass a bill to fund the government to keep the lights on and keep people, government employees paid, that strikes me as a threat to our democracy. Senate Democrats have long preached the virtues of bipartisanship, especially when it comes to avoiding government shutdowns. And in the past, they've wagged their finger. We've seen it all on social media and on cable TV. They've said shutdowns are idiocy. That's what the Democratic leader said on TV years ago when the shoe was on the other foot. He said it's idiocy. Well, I agree with him. It was idiocy then, and it's idiocy now. The American people may not understand the ins and outs of what goes on here, but what they can smell from a mile away is hypocrisy. And that's all this is, sheer hypocrisy. All our colleagues need to do when we vote here shortly is to vote for a clean, continuing resolution. And all of this can be reversed. And we can get back to the working together to try to solve some of the issues that I know they care about as well. We all care about access to health care. And that's one of the items that we have to address certainly before the end of the year with the expiring of certain provisions, certain subsidies for the Affordable Care Act. And we're happy to have that conversation, and we will have that conversation, but not while the government's shut down. So the good news is, well, let me back up and say the bad news is government shut down. The good news is that can end today, this afternoon. Democrats have an opportunity to vote with Republicans to pass a clean, continuing resolution, as they have at many times in the past. So I hope we can all join arms and say, let's put an end to this nonsense and pass this legislation on what will now be the fifth opportunity. The American people are counting on us, and we shouldn't let them down. Madam President, I yield the floor.